Today, Libra may notice something unusual, a slower rhythm, quietly entering the familiar flow of life. Not because life has stopped, and not because you've lost strength or motivation. That slower pace feels more like a natural pause, arriving right when you've been moving for so long, without truly looking back at yourself. There are days like this, when everything on the outside keeps running smoothly, yet inside, there's a quiet pull asking you to pause, even if only for a brief moment, to listen to something deeper. Libra is used to harmony, used to keeping things balanced, measured, never tipping too far in any direction. You're often very good at moving forward, even when something inside you feels unclear. But today, there's a subtle reminder rising from within. Continuing without understanding what you're carrying can make the journey heavier than it needs to be. No one is forcing you to stop. At a deeper level, you're the one gently calling yourself back. This pause doesn't arrive loudly. There's nothing dramatic about it. It might show up softly, as a passing thought while you're working, driving, or sitting alone in a familiar space. An unfinished question appears, then fades, but its echo lingers long enough for you to realize you can't keep brushing it aside. Maybe it's a feeling you've noticed before, more than once. The difference today is that you no longer want to push it away. For Libra, pausing is not failure, and it doesn't mean you're falling behind anyone else. Sometimes, it's simply a quiet expression of maturity. When you allow yourself to slow down, you allow honesty back in. Honesty with your emotions, your thoughts, and the things that have existed for a long time, without ever being named. Within that honesty, there's a different kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from no longer pretending you're fine. This moment may also carry Libra's familiar hesitation. You might wonder whether slowing down will disrupt the balance you've worked so hard to maintain. Yet sometimes, it's the refusal to pause that quietly tilts the inner scales without you noticing. Today's slower rhythm feels like a gentle invitation. It doesn't ask for immediate change. It doesn't demand a major decision. It asks for just one small thing: your attention. In this stillness, you may begin to sense more clearly what you've been carrying all along. Unspoken expectations, suppressed worries, thoughts you've set aside to keep peace for others. When you pause, these things no longer compete for space. They simply stand there, waiting to be seen. Without judgment, without pressure. Today's pause isn't about finding answers right away. It's like placing your feet on solid ground after a long walk, just to feel that you're still standing. And from that quiet steadiness, a very personal truth may begin to take shape. Not to shake you, but to help you move forward with a rhythm that feels more honest, lighter, and closer to who you truly are. Some things don't arrive by accident, even when they look completely ordinary on the surface. A passing comment from someone you know, a message that comes when you weren't expecting anything, a phone call that rings in the middle of what feels like a quiet, uneventful moment. Or sometimes, no one appears at all. Just a sudden realization, while you're alone, when something quietly clicks into place. For Libra, today's message may arrive in any of these forms. Nothing dramatic, no announcement, yet clear enough that you can't simply brush it aside. What makes this moment different is that the message doesn't come to disrupt your life. It isn't here to hurt you, and it doesn't try to pull you out of your comfort zone by force. It's more like a mirror placed in front of you at just the right time, so you can finally see what you've sensed for a long while, but never fully allowed yourself to confirm. And when your gaze meets that truth, you realize something quietly important. You no longer want to turn away. Libra is often very sensitive to other people's feelings, yet surprisingly gentle with yourself. You may have heard this message before, at different times, in different ways. But today, it carries a very different tone. It's no longer a vague hint. It feels clearer now, more defined, like something that is asking to be acknowledged. No one is forcing you to believe it. No one is demanding immediate action. Still, a part of you knows that if you keep ignoring it, you risk losing the inner balance you've always valued so deeply. This message doesn't ask you to choose between right and wrong. It doesn't divide life into opposing sides. Instead, it invites you to look at things with greater honesty, with more gentleness, and perhaps with a little less compromise toward your own emotions. For Libra, this is not an easy invitation to accept. And yet, that may be exactly why it arrives now. At a time when you're mature enough to listen, even if you're not quite ready to respond, you may begin to realize that what's being spoken today has existed for a very long time. It lives in the moments when you hesitated, in the silence you chose instead of saying what you truly felt, in the times you protected harmony at the cost of protecting yourself. This message doesn't accuse. It doesn't judge. It simply stands there, calm and steady, waiting for you to return and meet it, with the respect you owe yourself. When a message arrives at the right moment, it often feels both familiar and unfamiliar at once. Familiar, because you've sensed it before. Unfamiliar, because today, you no longer want to run from it. Libra may come to see that clarity isn't meant to break what already exists. It's meant to stop you from building your life on things that were never truly clear to begin with. And in that moment, you begin to understand something quietly powerful. Being honest with yourself is not selfish. On the contrary, it's the foundation that allows you to continue offering balance, fairness, and gentleness to the world around you in a healthier way. Today's message doesn't ask for immediate change. It asks for just one simple thing, that you don't turn your back on what you've already heard. From here on, Libra's story is no longer only about keeping the outside world calm and stable. It begins to move inward, into a deeper space. A space where you're willing to face what you once avoided. Not to burden yourself, but to make room for the clarity that is slowly, quietly taking shape. There are things you never truly forget. You simply learn how to walk around them, very carefully. Not because you lack courage, but because you understand that touching them too soon might disturb the fragile balance you've been trying to protect. Libra often chooses to keep the surface calm, even when there are currents underneath that have never fully settled. And over time, avoidance turns into a gentle habit, soft enough to convince you that you're fine, or at least fine in a way that feels acceptable. What you once avoided isn't always a specific event. It's not necessarily a person or a clearly defined situation. Sometimes, it's simply the feeling that what you're maintaining no longer fits who you are. A thought that returns whenever you're alone. A question you've never asked yourself directly because you're afraid the answer might demand too much change. You recognize this feeling well, and you're also very skilled at setting it aside, telling yourself the timing isn't right, or that everything will eventually balance itself out. Libra has a unique ability to see many sides of the same story. You understand why others behave the way they do. You empathize with their circumstances. You even sense what hasn't been said out loud. But because you understand so much, you sometimes forget that your own emotions deserve the same level of serious attention. In this case, avoidance isn't about running away. It's a subtle form of protection, even if it asks you to sacrifice a portion of your own truth. Today's truth doesn't arrive to force you to break what already exists. It doesn't push you into an immediate decision, but it also no longer allows you to keep pretending that everything is fine in the old way. There's a very thin line between keeping the peace and silencing yourself for too long. And perhaps it's right at that line that you begin to feel tired in a way that's difficult to explain. You may start to notice that what you've been avoiding has never truly disappeared. It has only changed shape, showing up in ordinary moments, in silences that last a little too long, in the hesitation before making small decisions, in the familiar uncertainty when you stand between what you genuinely want and what seems reasonable. These signs aren't loud, but they repeat often enough that you can no longer dismiss them. What matters here is that this truth doesn't come to make you feel guilty for choosing avoidance. It understands why you did. It understands that you were trying to keep things from falling apart, trying to make sure no one got hurt. At the same time, it gently reminds you that real balance cannot survive when it's built on ignoring your own emotions. And when that realization settles in, you may not yet know what comes next. But you do know one thing for certain. You no longer want to keep convincing yourself the way you used to. The hardest part isn't facing the truth. It's admitting that you've known it for a long time, that your intuition was never wrong. You just weren't ready to trust it. And this moment, even without clear answers, opens a new kind of space. A space where you allow yourself to feel more fully without editing yourself, without softening your emotions, to meet someone else's expectations. Today, Libra may not need to take action, but the fact that you've stopped pretending everything is fine is already a very real movement. From here on, silence is no longer a way of avoiding. It becomes a necessary pause, a waiting space, where you begin to look back at yourself with the same fairness and gentleness you've always offered to the world around you. While the outer world continues to hold its familiar order, something subtle begins to stir inside you, something difficult to name. The calm you've always carried doesn't disappear. It simply becomes thinner, just enough for what lies beneath, to gently reach your awareness. There may be a moment of uncertainty when you realize you're no longer as sure as you once were. There may be a light emptiness, like setting down an object you've held for too long, only then noticing how heavy it actually was. And sometimes, unexpectedly, there is a slow, quiet sense of relief, as if you've finally allowed yourself to take a deeper breath. You're not used to showing these shifts on the outside. For you, composure has always been the way to keep things from becoming complicated. But some emotions don't need to be displayed in order to be real. They only need to be acknowledged in silence. Once something has been named within you, you begin to notice you no longer have to tense yourself to maintain an image of stability, not because you're abandoning responsibility, but because you're allowing yourself to be more honest about what is actually happening. This moment may feel confusing because you're not accustomed to standing in that in-between space between understanding and not yet understanding. Yet it is precisely there that a very personal form of courage begins to take shape. Courage doesn't always look like bold action or a clear decision. Sometimes it's simply allowing yourself to think again, to feel again, without immediately pushing those feelings aside, out of fear of disturbing the balance around you. You may come to see that the emotions you once kept contained are not as overwhelming as you imagined. They don't rush in to break everything apart. They appear just long enough to be seen, then remain quietly present. And in that moment, you understand something important. Reconsidering doesn't make you weaker. On the contrary, it shows that you're steady enough to loosen your grip on what no longer reflects who you are now. There is a very subtle kind of release that comes when you stop convincing yourself that you're always fine. Not to complain, not to assign blame, just a gentle admission that you too have moments of uncertainty, emotions that haven't yet been neatly arranged, and none of that diminishes your worth. It simply brings you closer to what is real. Beneath the calm exterior, you begin to sense the rhythm of your inner world more clearly. No urgency, no panic, just a quieter, clearer presence of feeling like soft light slipping through a doorway at the end of the day. You don't need to share this with anyone. It's enough that you know you've allowed these feelings to exist without judgment, without correction. And right here, you begin to understand that your courage doesn't come from always appearing balanced to others. It comes from your willingness to look inward when no one else is there, to sit with your emotions even when they haven't fully taken shape, to trust that slowing down to reflect isn't moving backward, but quietly preparing you for a different way of moving forward, one that is steadier, more honest, and far less exhausting than before. As the thin layer of fog begins to lift, what remains is not the collapse you once feared. Instead, a quiet sense of steadiness appears, almost unnoticed, like the moment your foot finally touches solid ground. After walking a stretch of uncertain terrain, what you've just acknowledged doesn't take away anything worth keeping. It simply clarifies where you stand, so you no longer move forward in uncertainty. And that clarity itself becomes a new kind of support, not loud, not dramatic, but reliable enough to lean on. Libra may come to see that this support doesn't come from the outside. It isn't a promise. It isn't a guarantee offered by anyone else. It forms the moment you begin to look at life through a lens of greater self-respect. When you know where you stand, you no longer need to measure your pace against someone else's. You no longer feel compelled to preserve what no longer fits, just to keep the overall picture intact. This new grounding helps you tell the difference between what deserves to continue and what quietly needs adjustment. Not everything must change. Some values you've built over time remain intact and worthy of being protected. But there are also small details, habits, ways of responding that have already served their purpose. When you allow yourself to see that, you don't lose who you are. You refine the way you show up in your life. Libra often carries a deep desire to create harmony for everyone. Yet, sometimes, true harmony needs to begin with you standing firmly within your own space. This new support doesn't ask you to act immediately. It simply allows you to move forward with greater awareness so that each step is no longer automatic, but a conscious choice. And within that choice, there is a quiet yet powerful sense of self-respect. You may begin to notice a subtle shift in the way you see things. Less urgency to please others, less questioning of whether your choices might disappoint someone. Instead, you start asking gentler, more honest questions of yourself. Does this still reflect who I am right now? Am I moving forward through excessive compromise? This grounding doesn't turn you into someone new. It simply helps you stand taller within the version of yourself that is maturing. You don't need to prove this to anyone. That steadiness shows itself in your ability to remain quiet when needed, to speak when it feels necessary, and to release the guilt around protecting your own boundaries. And then you realize something else. Moving forward with awareness doesn't make the journey heavier. It makes each step lighter because you're no longer carrying what was never truly yours. This new support doesn't promise anything about what lies ahead, but it gives you something very real. The feeling that wherever the road may lead, you are walking it on your own feet, with respect for yourself and for the rhythm of life you have chosen to honor. As the day slowly comes to an end, you may notice that you no longer feel the need to say anything more, not because you lack thoughts, but because what needed to be understood has already settled within you. Libra is used to expressing things used to, weighing every word so nothing becomes tense or uncomfortable. But now, silence carries a very different meaning. It isn't emptiness. It's a space wide enough for your feelings to arrange themselves in the most natural way. You don't rush to respond. You don't feel the need to prove that you've understood or that you're ready. A new inner order is forming, slowly, deeply, like pieces finding their place, without being forced. In this quiet, you allow yourself to reflect without judgment, to feel without needing to name anything, and to stay with yourself, without the pressure of explaining it to anyone. Libra may begin to see that not every answer needs to be spoken. There are moments in life when keeping something to yourself is how you protect a balance that is both fragile and deeply valuable. This silence is not avoidance. It is a conscious choice, a space where you allow what you've just seen and understood, the time it needs to settle, instead of rushing to turn it into action or promises. Within this space, you start to understand something important. Moving forward doesn't always look like obvious motion. Sometimes, it simply means you stop convincing yourself the way you once did. You stop minimizing what you feel. You stop forcing yourself to be fine, just to keep the world around you calm. Acknowledging what's already present, even without knowing where it will lead, is already a very real step forward. No one around you may notice this shift. Everything still looks familiar. You are still you, with the same composed, measured presence. But inside, you know you've set down an invisible weight. And once that weight is gone, there's no need to move faster, only to move more accurately, in rhythm with the life that now feels right to you. In the end, today's story doesn't close with a major decision, nor with a firm declaration. It closes with permission. Permission to pause. Permission to let a truth exist, without rushing to fix it. Permission for silence, to become a complete answer for this moment. And perhaps for Libra, the very moment you no longer feel the need to say anything at all is when everything inside begins to find its balance in the most honest way possible.